Today, we're going to be talking about habits, goals, and how you can use both of them to get the most out of your life. This is Mindset and Mastery. I'm Nathan Frazier. I've got Brett Venat with me as always. Brett, how you doing?
Great, Nathan. How are you?
I'm good, man, and I'm excited to get into today's topic because when I approached you with it, I was like, "Yo, let's do a show on goals," and you were like, "Yo, goals suck, man."
Goals are for losers.
Yeah, so
Scott
I,
Adams said that. That's not me. That's Scott Adams. But we'll get into that. And I'm excited about this one because there might be some points of disagreement.
you know what? I think that a lot of times our points of disagreement are where the most interesting conversations come from. So I'm
I agree.
excited for that.
Then I disagree.
You agree and you disagree. All right. So I wanted to do a show about goals. I think goals are important because without them, you're just kind of like a rudderless ship. But when I said, hey, let's do a show about goals, you said, I don't think goals are the most important thing. I think that habits are more important. I don't know if after talking to you, I don't know if I completely agree with you yet, but it is going to come up in the conversation. I wanted to kind of talk about the difference between goals and habits to start off, and then we can get into my top 3 tips on goal setting, your top 3 tips on healthy habit building, and then we can end the show. That's kind of the format that I'm hoping that we can stick to on this week's episode. So what do you mean when you say that goals aren't what you view as important and you focus more on habits?
Well, I think it also relates to systems. Like if we're using goals as guidance for action, I am accepting of that. But if I don't know, I've always just kind of been really skeptical about like have really great big audacious goals that you don't even know how you're going to achieve. And like I said, I was informed by people like Scott Adams. Everybody knows the Dilbert guy who's made quite a name for himself in the last few years, just blogging and being out there with his voice and his perspective on things. But he talks about goals versus systems, and I don't think that you can just have really great habits without any kind of larger guidance, which is where people often put in goals. Like, these are my 3 goals for this quarter, or here's my goal for this year. I'm not saying that people should completely abandon that. And I actually like that we have 2 different perspectives. The other thing here is that people have to figure out the unique blend that's going to work for them as individuals, right? So some people might do really well with this, some people might not. I do think that whether people are pursuing very specific goals on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, on a yearly basis, 5-year plan, that kind of thing, the right habits in service of those goals need to be in place. So that's why I prioritize healthy and helpful habits over goals, right? I think people need to build a system, and maybe you've got a system that is more goal focused, and I can't wait to hear about it.
Okay, so I don't know if I disagree. I think that maybe it's a slight variation of definitions, or maybe just a little bit of I put the focus on a little bit on one end of the scale where you put the focus on the other end of the scale. I do think that a there's a relationship between the two, and I think that both have their place in that relationship. And I actually am a very goal-oriented person, just because throughout my life, I've found that when I set goals, I have more of it's easier for me to do the stuff that you're talking about. So, but if I don't have a goal, it's impossible for me to do the systems stuff. So I feel like, for me at least, the goals are kind of the step 1, and then the habits in the system are the step 2. But without the step 1, it's almost impossible for me to implement the step 2. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it also depends on what kind of work you do and what kind of purpose that work serves. So, if you tend to be more independent and creative, like we both do creative work, we both do knowledge work to a certain extent, you have more clients, let's say, than I do, or you know more clients. Like you have a closer relationship to a lot of the people you're working with or for. So um, milestones are maybe more important in the kind of work you're doing to put multiple people pursuing the same project on the same page, right? So it might be the kind of work you're doing dependent. Now, if you're doing primarily creative work and highly independent work, setting a bunch of goals could wind up, I think, being a source of frustration. I have started, I don't know, I'm estimating 500 projects that never worked to completion just because I was in charge of the project and my motivations changed, right? Or my level of interest in it changed. Or maybe at first I had a really high level of interest in something and something else replaced that high level of interest, or I lost that high level of interest for some other reason. So to set goals in stone while you're doing highly independent and highly creative work, I think is going to it threatens to lead that type of worker to a very visible record of what appears to be failure. You know, and we talked about this before in Mindset and Mastery, the book The Way of the Superior Man, you know, and always being willing to reevaluate purpose, which I would say is above goals in the system that we're going to build here if you want goals to be a part of it. So there needs to be some, I think, self acceptance and flexibility in that as long as you are pursuing a higher purpose, which I think is something that you're going to talk about in your top 3 tips for goal setting, then you need to be flexible in the path to getting there, right? And you're a changing being in a changing world, and there are just going to be, you know, projects and pursuits that you abandon. And I hope that people aren't overly judgmental towards themselves when this happens. So that's just like that's a cautioning, maybe more against having a system that is goals focused.
Okay. I'll actually have some pushback against that towards the end of the episode, and we'll discuss that. But let's go ahead and just jump into each of our top 3. For me, I'm going to focus on the top 3 tips for goal setting, and the first one for me is a clearly defined destination. I find that a lot of people, their goals are vague. Their where they want to go is really vague. It's kind of like, I want to have enough money that I don't have to worry about money anymore. Okay, well, how much money is that? Or I want to have a job that I love doing. Okay, well, what do you love doing? A lot of times with people with their goals, it's this very like, and they don't want, I think the reason why is they don't want to really narrow down and be very specific because they're afraid of that failure. If I clearly define it and then I don't reach exactly what I defined, then I'm a failure. So if I keep it vague, if I say, I want to make money doing what I love, oh, this month I made $5 doing what I love. I sold my yarn knitting on Etsy for $5. I made money doing what I love. I accomplished my goal. But did you really, though? If you're being honest with yourself, you're not really accomplishing goals that way. I kind of liken it to going to a car dealership and you're like, hey, I want a car. And the dealership guy is, the salesperson is like, well, what kind of a car? Oh, I don't know. A car, maybe 4 wheels. That's not giving the car salesman very much to work with. So when you're setting your goals and you're just like, I want to make money doing what I love, or I want to never have to worry about money again, or I want to find a significant other, a girlfriend or a boyfriend that treats me with respect. I feel like if you're not clearly defining what respect is, if you're not clearly defining what success is, you're never really going to get there. You don't, and the reason why is if you don't have a very clear North Star that you're working towards, if you don't have a clearly defined destination that you're working towards, it's hard to tell if you're actually moving towards it. If it's just this vague, fuzzy thing out in the ether, you can be going to the west, you can be going to the east, you might even be going to the south, and you won't know that you're going in the wrong direction because you haven't clearly defined what your North Star is. So for me, the very first and most important thing is to have a clear definition, not just this fuzzy, vague, all-encompassing goal. So whether it's I want to be a multimillionaire, or it's I want to have a girl that fits these specific standards, or a man that fits these specific standards, or a career that fits these specific standards, or a way of being, an identity. This is the type of person that I want to be. I want to be somebody who's calm, who's successful, who's patient, who's understanding. Whatever it is, if it's not clearly defined, I don't think that you'll ever be able to make it to it. And mostly just because if you don't know exactly where you're going, you have no way to determine whether you're walking in the right direction or not. Before I move on to the next two, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I really, the more I listen to you talk about it, I think it comes down a lot to like personality types. I know plenty of people who would have listened to what you just said and say, absolutely, I could not imagine functioning any other way, right? With metrics along the way, benchmarks towards the completion of this goal. Like some people, I think, need that kind of clarity before they can put one foot in front of the other. And then there might be some other people, or what you just described was actually a source of stress. Again, to the more independent and creative type worker who, if they start moving along this path and they don't see a kind of tangible progress, well, yes, there is an opportunity for like an honest reevaluation of actions being taken. Like, why is tangible progress not measurable at this point? But it also might just be a source of stress and discontent for a certain personality type. So I think actually we're going to find, and to your clearly defined destination, I'm going to side more on not so clearly defined, but a destination, right? Or something, as you call it, like a North Star, something that does have gravity that will pull a person forward. It has to be believed fully. It has to be compelling. But if you're just talking about a clearly defined destination for a specific goal, I'm going to go broader than that and less clear than that, which I think allows a certain personality type a little bit more flexibility to continue moving forward and not getting stressed out or frustrated or fearing like a failure for abandoning 498 projects in the last decade. Yeah.
Okay. I'll go back to why I think that a clearly defined destination is important, and that's with my second goal setting tip, which is, we talked about this on the last episode, conscious content consumption. A lot of times we consume content that is not helping propel us towards our goals. A lot of times we consume a lot of content that is actually pushing us away from our goals. I know that personally for myself, if especially over the last year, I consumed a lot of content that was not pushing me forward. A lot of it was pushing me backward. And during 2020, I saw the results of that. I saw a huge impact of me being pushed away from my goals. At the end of 2019, I was killing it in my business. And throughout 2020, because of everything that went on and all of the content that I was consuming, I stopped reading a lot of marketing books. I stopped reading a lot of personal development books. I stopped doing a lot of the habits that I was doing during 2019 that got me to where I was at the end of 2019. I had the best year in my business that I had ever had. And because I consumed so much content that was not propelling me forward during 2020, my business suffered a lot because of it. My personal life suffered a lot because of it. My personal development suffered a lot because of it. So for me, one very important thing, and one of the reasons why a clearly defined destination is so important, is because I'm constantly checking, is the content that I'm consuming pushing me towards where I want to go, or is it pushing me away from where I want to go? Or is it just not adding value to where I want to go? So if where I want to go is I want to have a successful business, I want to make my clients a lot of money, and I want to spend time with the people that I care about. Those are kind of my three core values. Am I consuming content that helps push me towards those three core values, those clearly defined goals? Or am I consuming content that does nothing to add to that or actually pushes me away from that? If I don't have those clearly defined goals, it's hard for me to measure whether the content that I'm consuming is pushing me forward or pushing me to the right or pushing me to the left. Or as I found during 2020, a lot of the content that I was consuming was actually pushing me backwards. And so without a clearly defined goal, it's hard for me to measure whether the content I'm consuming is actually pushing me forward. And if I'm not being able to measure that, there's a good chance that my life is being pushed by outward influences, by the YouTube videos that I'm watching, by the podcasts that I'm listening to, and they're in charge of where I'm going rather than me being in charge of where I'm going. So for me, number one and number two, a clearly defined destination, and then consciously thinking about and examining the content that I'm consuming, they kind of go hand in hand. Before I go to number three, what do you think?
I absolutely love that one. It actually relates to a lot of what I would talk about with habit, right? Where you are at a small kind of low stakes stage saying, is this helping me or hurting me? Is this moving me forward or backward? Which is what we should be doing in the evaluation of all of our habits. Well, obviously, in 2021 or in the 21st century period, media consumption is on everybody's list of habits, whether it's podcasting or YouTube or Netflix or whatever. Everybody is habitually consuming content at a greater rate than at any point in human history. I think that's a fact. I think that's indisputable. So now to look at that, by the way, I would just like to say I'm on day 4 of my no news November, where I do not look at news on social media, which means I can barely go on Facebook. I can only use Facebook Messenger. Can't go on Instagram. Can't go on Twitter. Not that I ever do. What a nightmare. And I can't really go to YouTube. I can't listen to podcasts that are news focused. And only 4 days into it, a couple days have passed, and I've gone, wow, I can't believe how much I did today, or I can't believe how much I did yesterday without taking the time to go down one of those YouTube spirals. And you're right. Like, I don't think news consumption really offers us anything. I think, being prepared for, like, having enough, like, contextual knowledge to understand what's generally going on in the world, that's a good thing. But to feel like you need to be checking in on current events every day. Now, this is a dependency that a lot of media organizations, mainstream and alternative, do try to build in people, that kind of dependency. But you start to see, if you need to return to that every day to, for this big FOMO feeling that you have, that needs to start being looked at like a kind of addiction. And not only is it time consuming, but it is also mental and emotional energy consuming. And that is draining resources that could be better allocated elsewhere, right? In the pursuit of something that is inside your sphere of control. All news is outside of your sphere of control. If you, have means of self-protection, you have some money and food put away, like, you did your part. You did your part for yourself. You don't need to check. People will let you know when shit hits the fan, right? A friend will call you. I'm not saying that, like, consume no news, but if you find yourself consuming too much, I highly recommend, like, a week of just removing it from your life and a really, like, conscious evaluation of how it changes your levels of, awareness and mental energy and your emotional state. It's a worthwhile experiment. So I'm all for constant content consumption, constant conscious content consumption. And if you find like it's slipping away from you, or you're just on autopilot, right? Because it's easy to go on autopilot. And this is just a bad habit that happens without thinking about it. I sit down at the computer with a lunch and I go through YouTube, and I watch news videos, or I listen to this podcast while I'm walking or working out or whatever, or driving. And it's just putting this, at a lot of times, poison in your mind, because it's information that is not actionable for you. And the subtlety of that is disempowerment,
Mm-hmm.
right? And increasing this feeling of smallness. If that is your entire media consumption world, things that you cannot do anything about, things you cannot take action on, you're going to feel less powerful and less potent, or less. Well, those are synonyms, but I repeat myself because it's worth repeating.
Okay. And then this one's going to be a little bit controversial.
This one I don't get. I'm interested in this one. This is like, it seems like the opposite of what you should do.
Yeah, it's very counterintuitive, but it's very powerful. Number 3, keep it a secret. I am a firm believer in this. I have a mastermind. I share my goals, my plans, my plots, my schemes with the mastermind, and they usually don't go beyond that as far as the people that I'm sharing my stuff with. If I've got a goal, if I've got something that I'm going to work towards, the worst thing that I can do is go share it with someone who's going to start feeding me a bunch of doubt. Someone who's going to say, that's not possible. That's not feasible. That's not a realistic goal. A lot of people have the tendency to put their insecurity, their lack of belief, their inability to get what they want out of life, and they want to project it onto you. And if you're somebody who is a high achieving person, if you're somebody who has ambitious goals that make other people feel more insecure, make people realize, hey, if this person's out here doing it, why am I not? A lot of times, if you succeed, those who aren't succeeding, or those who aren't even trying, will resent you for it, and they'll try and tear you down. And so if you're someone who's very ambitious and you go and share your ambitions with the other 98% of the world who's just content on letting other people steer their destinies, if you go out and share your goals with those people, the first thing that you're going to get is a bunch of reasons why it won't work, a bunch of reasons why it's a childish, unrealistic, stupid goal, and that's going to feed their energy into your destiny, into your destination. And I want to be in control of my destiny. I want to be in control of my destination. And the best way to maintain the direction that I want my ship going in is to not let everybody on the crew grab the steering wheel. And by sharing stuff before it's ready for consumption, before it's ready to go test on the market, a lot of times you have everybody on the ship wants to grab the steering wheel and tell you you're steering in the wrong direction. And so for me, I have my mastermind, which includes you, Brett. And I have a couple of really trusted friends that I can go to. But for the most part, for 98% of the people in my life, most of my goals, I keep a secret, and I wait until they're 80-90% towards realization before I tell people, no, it wasn't an accident. I've been plotting this for 5 years. I've been plotting this for 3 months. I've been plotting this for however long. I just didn't tell you about it because I didn't want you telling me it was a stupid idea and letting that feed into my psyche before I actually realized it. So up until about 80-90% of the way, I'm a very firm believer in keeping your goals a secret, except for to a very trusted, supportive group of people. And if you don't have trusted, supportive group of people, just completely keep it a secret. Do not share your goals with people who will only give you reasons to doubt yourself.
Okay. With that qualifier at the end that you added about the trusted group of people, I agree. I do agree. Now, there is a kind of conscious living exercise that you could do, not you, but just people generally, to test their commitment. Who am I sharing my goals with? And am I going to my uncle, right, who's worked at the toll booth for the last 40 years and never really aspired to do anything bold or unique? Am I going and saying, hey, Uncle Jim, let me tell you about this crazy idea that I have? And Jim would say, that's stupid and dangerous. Well, if you chose your Uncle Jim, maybe your commitment to it, you're kidding yourself about what your commitment to it actually was, right? But if it is like the most, it's kind of like the average of the five people you spend the most time with. If those are the people, like you've chosen those people wisely, they're motivated, they're ambitious, they're achieving, or at least on the path to achieving, and you say, hey, there is also, I think, some value in saying, hey, what do you see? What might my emotional investment in this thing be like clouding my vision about it in some way, right? So the mastermind or a trusted group of people, as long as they are not naysayers, as long as they're not people who aren't really motivated or ambitious on their own, I think having that group of people to share the secret with is very valuable, right? But there's a way of like, if you just want to, if everybody listening just wants to kind of look at who they chose to share these things with, were they trying to find people who would test their commitment by saying like, I admire the fact that you have goals. Here's some obstacles that I see that you might want to consider now, so it doesn't derail you in a really frustrating way in the future, but I think you should pursue it. Or are you sharing it with people who say, don't do anything unusual or dangerous because the world will punish you for that, like Uncle Jim at the toll booth? So
Uncle Jim.
That's a good history to look at. But yeah, I actually agree. Like, be very, very selective about who you share that stuff with, and make sure they can, if any criticism comes, that it is constructive and still motivating.
Okay, so those are my top 3 tips. Number 1, clearly defined destination. Number 2, conscious content consumption. And number 3, keep it a secret. And so those are my tips for goals and goal setting. Now, I don't know if there's a good way to segue into this, so I'm just going to kind of break through the wall and just charge into it. What are your top 3 tips for habit building?
All right, so I'm going to go 2 big picture and 1 that is more practical, right? So I like your idea of the clearly defined destination if we're just going to generalize it enough to something that is big, that has a kind of gravity, as big things do, right? That will pull you forward, that will take you in that direction, whether it's a specific goal, or in my case, I would say a larger purpose, right? What Napoleon Hill called, either in Think and Grow Rich, or what was the other one, The Master Key to Riches, or maybe both. He probably used this term in both of those books. A definite major purpose, right? You have something that gives your life meaning. It could change, right? Over the course of your, like, I didn't have one before I was like 33 or 34 years old. I was very much just working from scripts that had been written for me. At least until, I started School Sucks podcast, even though I knew like deep down that I wanted to break free of following somebody else's script. I didn't know how to do it. And I didn't know by what means to pursue doing it. So having a purpose of your own, I think, is a very, very important that North Star. That's the North Star in my universe, I would say, is purpose more than a specific set of goals. And so this is, knowing what you want and how to get it by establishing what we call in Mindset and Mastery guiding principles, what is also known as core values. I'm just going to plug this other blog. This guy, Taylor Pearson, has a really good like one-sheet resource on core values and how to establish them. But I think that your core values, or these guiding principles, should serve your purpose. And your purpose should be built from, again, living consciously, a self-knowledge, and an honest, non-judgmental self-evaluation, right? Towards writing your own script. Like, I like these things. These things give me satisfaction. This is something in life I don't enjoy. Like, really knowing yourself allows you, I think, in continuously trying to learn yourself, gives you the best chance of establishing a clear and compelling purpose. So now, as we get into building a system, the core values come under that. So if we think as a pyramid, the purpose is at the top. The purpose is the capstone. The core values are holding up the capstone, and the actions or the habits that you take support the core values. So core values are very, very good for decision making and action taking. And also, like you talked about with media consumption, action evaluation. Is this specific thing that I do? Opening this website when I hit a frustrating moment with something I'm working on, and vegging out, or getting this kind of a dopamine hit, or going out Thursday, Friday, Saturday night to the bar. Are these actions, or these habits, or these practices serving that purpose? Like, those are the kind of, and more important, because purpose is big and far away, right? So the core values thing is kind of an intermediary, right? Does this action serve these values, which are supposed to serve this purpose? So that's like the 1, 2, 3 of building that system.
It feels
Yeah.
like you have a destination on the map, and then your core values are the roadmap itself, and you can check and say, okay, did I take a left turn when I should have kept going straight? Oh, I did. I need to get back on this main highway again.
So if purpose is a region, right, a destination, a place you want to wind up, right? Say it might be California, if you're crazy, right?
Oh God.
Right. So California is the endpoint. So what are the major highways? Like, what are the 5 best routes to California? That was a ridiculous example. I'm sorry. But if I just, there's something about the destination that I don't like, but like, this is the place that I'm trying to get to, or this is the person that I want to be, the things that I want to achieve as that person. This is this is how I would like to be remembered. This is the mark I would like to make on this existence. If that's destination, what are the pathways that take you there? And then the habits are sort of the continuous on ramps to those pathways. The small actions that you take in service of core values, in service of a purpose.
I think in Mindset and Mastery, we talk about the North Star avatar, who you want to be, what type of person do you want to be, what type of values do you want to be or embody, what type of, how do you want to respond to things? What does that person look like? That's kind of like what you're talking about. And I feel like maybe not so much as goals, but as your persona, as your value system. I do think that stuff needs to be clearly defined. It can't just be, I want to be a good person. You need to define what a good person means to you.
Exactly. So, I've talked about purpose before, and it's something like, leaving lives that I encounter better than I found them through education, entertainment, and accessibility, to help liberate people from the things that make them unhappy and unfree, or help them liberate themselves from those things. And that has been embodied in the last 12 years with the School Sucks project. So I also understand that the genuine pursuit of that purpose, or like being in integrity with that purpose, it's definitely built, I shouldn't say kind of built, on my own happiness and emotional well-being. Who am I to try and help other people do that if I feel trapped, if I feel miserable, or if I'm deeply unsatisfied with myself? So that is generally my purpose, right? To liberate people from the things that make them unhappy and unfree, or help them liberate themselves with education, or this intersection of education, entertainment, and accessibility. And there's plenty of people. The reason why I say that is there's plenty of people who are super smart, but if they're not entertaining and they're not meeting people where they are, they're not accessible, right? There's people who are accessible and educational, but if they're not really like entertaining, they're not humorous. It's like, that's also a difficult path to follow, because there's plenty of people who say, hey, I get that you're a beginner, but now I'm going to talk to you in a really boring way for 2 hours. So, my experience, like using an audience as feedback, but also using a classroom as feedback, I realized the strengths that I had, right? When I started my podcast, I knew I wasn't a genius, but I had a pretty good sense of humor and people seemed to like it. So I chose to accentuate that. So that was kind of how I built that purpose, through a feedback loop of the work that I wanted to do and had done in the real world. And the core values concept, which I actually learned about much later, in service of that purpose that has existed for quite some time, obviously freedom is sort of central to it. And I'm just going to run through these really quickly, right? Because I can't really help others, do likewise in that liberation if I'm not constantly working on that myself. So, like, personal freedom in all theaters of life is a really, really important core value for me. People will say, like, have 5 of these. I've got 6, maybe more, and this is always open for reevaluation as well, based on, are these still the best routes to purpose? Some others for me: creativity, humor, and then there's ones that are more personal, about kind of self-management, things like fitness, maintaining a certain level of order and organization in life, and personal development is another very important one for me to, generate excitement for talking about and teaching new things. So those were the core values that I thought were best in service of my purpose. And then I'm doing the very best I can, certainly not executing this with perfection, to always take action in service of those values, in service of that purpose. So that's my number 1. And that actually is a good chunk of my number 2, which is prioritizing systems over goals, right? So I just want to ask you, did you ever pursue a goal where you were absolutely miserable through the whole process?
I can't think of any instances like that. I know that I have set goals for myself and then realized, wow, this is not as easy as I thought it was going to be, or as rewarding as I thought it was going to be, or sometimes halfway through realizing, okay, this is not actually something that is even important to me anymore. But I don't think anything that I've been miserable through the entire process, though.
I think of something like grad school for me,
Oh,
right?
I'm a high school dropout, so
Yeah, you were smart. I mean, you got out of school at the right time. And as people who've listened to us for a while know, you tried to get out in kindergarten, but they made you go back. But yeah, good for you. Good for all you dropouts out there. But I stuck around for like 6 years after high school graduation, pursuing a master's degree in education and a teaching certificate while teaching. So I worked 5 days a week in a very stressful environment. I went to school Saturday and Sunday all day. And this was to just get a piece of paper to say you have a master's degree in education and you have a permission slip to teach in our precious public schools, right? That was why I did that. Now, I didn't finish that. I dropped out. But before I dropped out of a master's program, I endured probably the most miserable, like, 12 to 18 months of my life. And there was nothing. I think it was the first understanding, even though I didn't have the vocabulary and I didn't have the action plan to remedy this, but it was my first glimpse at the idea that I was following somebody else's script. You want to be a teacher? Okay, now success means getting this advanced degree. It means getting this permission slip to say that you're allowed to stand in the front of our classrooms and, regurgitate our nonsense from the state standards of wherever you're given permission to teach. And it just made me feel like, what am I living for? I'm not, that sounded very grim, but like, it's not myself. It's a question, right? I'm not living for myself. This is not my own purpose. It's like, okay, we see that you have this interest in doing this thing, right? Or there's something in you where you want to communicate ideas and excite people. This is the track that you can follow, and these are all the things you have to check off and the rules you have to adhere to if you want to do that thing that excites you, right? So it's very much like, oh, we see you have some motivation, and we see you maybe even have some self-direction, but sorry about that. Here's the tracks you have to get on. That's how the world works. So that was just why I asked. I'm sure I'm not the only person. Certainly, I would imagine there's a lot of people in education who pursued a path in pursuit of a goal or a piece of paper for an extended period of time while they were stressed out and miserable the entire time. Think about medical school, right? Or even nursing school. Like they torture those poor people as they go through that. I mean, to see if they're going to be able to handle the pressures of the job, maybe, but like becoming an MD and going through a residency, like that is grueling. And lots of people develop like substance abuse problems doing that. So I would just say, for me, it is more important to enjoy process. Why do so many people start diets or fitness programs, but they don't stick with them? Because they're like, oh, I need to lose 20 pounds, right? Or I need to get my cholesterol down. So it is entirely like replicating the school process, right? You need to do good here for 3 months so you can get a report card that your parents won't ground you for bringing home, right? Entirely extrinsic motivation. So people pursue health and fitness goals the same way. And what I've said to the people that I've tried to like coach a little bit with fitness stuff is you have to enjoy the process. It can't be grueling. It can't feel like an obligation. So you have to have ownership over the system that you're using. I hear people talk about, like let's just kind of focus in on fitness here for a minute. I want to do this many pull-ups, or I want to deadlift 315 pounds or whatever it is. And they're not enjoying all the work or all the energy they have to expend in the meantime to get there. So you need to have enough, like you will enjoy things if they are voluntarily chosen and you have ownership over the process. If you're doing something for any reason that doesn't feel intrinsically motivated, there's a good chance that it's going to suck, or your motivation and willpower and self-discipline is going to diminish over time, right? And it's a very, very, very high friction thing. So long story short, I think that building a system, whether it's related to work or some other pursuit, it is an intersection of those values that we talk about and the vision that you have for your life or this pursuit and how it translates into action, right? So again, the system is purpose supported by the guiding principles, supported by habits, right? And I think enjoying the habits, enjoying the doing we could die tomorrow, or not be able to do the things we love tomorrow, and we're focused on something that's 5 years away. I think it's worth trying to maximize your enjoyment and satisfaction out of the doing in the short term. So that's why systems are self-controlled systems, and constantly reevaluated systems are really important. Like you're in control, you're pursuing something that's intrinsically motivated.
One thing that I want to add to that is, as goal-orientated people or as destination-orientated people, it's real easy to lose sight of how far we've come. We're looking at the top of the mountain and we're like, oh my God, the top of the mountain is still so far away. But to be able to stop and realize how far you've made it and how great the journey has been so far, and where you're no longer at the foot of the mountain, you're halfway up the mountain, and to be able to stop and celebrate the journey itself and where you're at on the journey, and not just beat yourself up because you haven't made it to the top of the mountain yet.
So you want my number 3, which is just very practical?
Yeah.
All right. Number 3 is reduce friction and understand what creates it. So I think everybody knows I guess it is like the go-to book on habit by James Clear. It's called Atomic Habits. Have you ever read Atomic Habits?
Yeah, it's a great book.
I think it has a lot of good suggestions in it, but there's some things that I'm against, like reward systems and even like habit tracking. Habit tracking is really useful, but if it is for rewarding yourself, like if I can check this box 5 days in a row, then I get a treat. That is a kind of behaviorism that I just can't get behind, just from my experience in school. But I think one of the best takeaways from Atomic Habits is something that he calls the 2-minute rule, which is as far as friction reduction is concerned, when you start something new, it should take less than 2 minutes to do. Now, obviously, let's get real. It kind of depends on what it is. You might need to set that at 5 minutes. Like if it's some kind of fitness pursuit, maybe it's 10 or 15 minutes. But you don't go to whatever Shape Magazine or muscleandfitness.com and here's the get back in shape workout plan. It's 6 days a week, an hour and a half each day. You did that. You went there to set yourself up for failure, right? So reducing as much friction as possible, whether it's something like journaling or meditation. Like years ago, we used to talk about what was called the 5-minute journal, which is like in service of this James Clear idea. Have minimal friction at the starting point. And then here's the trick to this one. And this is really required. Even if you start as easy as possible, build up to a more intense version of whatever that thing is, a longer duration, right? New challenges. And I do think that tracking for the purpose of having a kind of quantified life with whatever you're doing, the idea of a weekly review, whether it's related to work or diet or fitness or any other type of pursuit, like you look back at the week, and this is an idea that comes from Getting Things Done by David Allen. You look back at the week and you do an honest evaluation of what was done, what was left undone, and you try to understand through your actions why. But I think that minimizing friction is very, very important in the setting up of anything new in service of this system that we talked about, right? I need a new action in pursuit of this guiding principle, in pursuit of this purpose. How do I start that action? Minimize the friction, minimize the obstacles. He also talks about like creating the right kind of environment and putting things where they need to be to make sure something happens. Because if you're scrambling to find your shoes when you're supposed to run for 5 minutes, that is a source of friction that like we only get so much willpower, right? And we have to like spend it in the most appropriate places. The other book that I just want to mention something from really quickly is called The 5-Second Rule. It's by this woman, Mel Robbins, who says motivation is garbage, right? So we have habits are, what was it? Goals are for losers and motivation is garbage. Not a good title for our episode. But one of the insights that's in the 5-second rule is that our mind is very much designed to find the path of least resistance for us. Our mind is also designed, if we go further away, like from the front, like the prefrontal cortex, down more to where the fear centers are, our mind wants to stop us from doing things that might hurt us. Now, hurt can mean lots of things, right? It can mean actual physical injury, but could also mean embarrassment or disappointment. So when a new challenge is presented to the mind, there's going to be a kind of natural resistance there. There's, most people have a habit of hesitating, analysis paralysis, right? Like, I'm going to do this thing once I figure out how to do it perfectly. You and I have had this debate before. Like, should we start doing this now? It's not perfect yet, I said to Nathan. And he said, no, we should start doing it now and refine it along the way. And I think that's like, get moving towards your next mistake, as a friend of mine says. I think instead of just sitting there inert, waiting for, the perfect formulation of how you want to do this thing, even if it's just like, I want to start meditating. So I'll spend the next 6 months reading about meditation and kind of aggregating all of the best information. And then I'll start my 2-minute meditation. So I was talking with a friend of mine yesterday. He's a musician. And I was on the way out of the house for a walk while we were on the phone. And I ran back in to write down this quote from one of the music professors that he had had in his life. And it's lesser, I wrote it down on this big pad and I have it right here. Lesser artists are sequential. Greater artists are simultaneous, right? So the sequential thinker is like, once I do this, then I can do this. And then once I do that, then I can do this. But if you're at once I do this, well, you can just get stuck there instead of like this idea of always being in motion, right? Sequential, right? Things are moving at once, right? There is fluidity. An example would be like if you're jogging down the street and you're in a great mood and your neighbor waves and bounces a basketball at you and you catch it and you bounce it back and you say, yeah, that was great, Dave. you're ready for that. You're ready to receive the bounced basketball. But if you're lying on your couch watching TV and somebody goes through the door and throws a basketball at you, you're going to be like, what the hell? Why would you do that? That was dangerous. So I think like that idea of being in motion is really, really important. And it's that hesitation, whether it's like indecision or I need to refine this more or I need to figure out how this is going to work better, instead of just starting to put one foot in front of the other. Like our brain wants to do that. Our brain wants to resist. Our brain wants to hesitate. And it kind of leads into just a quick number 4 that I don't want to get into in a lot of detail because I'm not qualified to do so. But I think this is just a really good insight to mention if somebody's listening and they've been struggling with motivation and self-discipline and positive habit formation for a while. It's also like a non-judgmental approach, like we took in the last show with mass formation. It's like, this isn't just a bunch of assholes who are trying to make us angry by acting this way. There's like a mass psychological phenomenon to what is happening right now that is actually measurable. And it kind of removes the resentment and the otherizing from that, if you can get a clear understanding of what is actually happening. But, who are we more critical of than ourselves? Like we can beat ourselves up and be very judgmental with ourselves. So the more like we talked about mindsight in the last show, like when you can get a neurological explanation, a chemical explanation for what's going on, I think that is a really, really helpful thing to stop talking down to yourself, to stop beating yourself up. So if you have the time and if your struggle has been considerable enough, find ways to like know your neurochemistry and understand that a lot of your struggles around positive habit formation are, the cause and effect most likely of either behavioral or biological factors. So there are lots of people who've done great work on this motivation neurotransmitter called dopamine. And, you could listen to somebody say, who's the Jocko Willink, right? I get up at 4:30 in the morning and I do this and I do that. And you go, why am I such a loser if I can't do that? Or somebody out there says that. You're listening to a person who might have an entirely different neurochemistry setup than you do. And so understanding more about his and understanding more about yours can be, I think, a really, really helpful activity in getting some clarity around like what is actually physically going on with me, and that is a great way to remove self-judgment, which I think is really, really important when it comes to putting one foot in front of the other.
I would agree. I don't know how to segment into the end of this show, but I did have one last tip that I wanted to talk about, and that's focus. We've talked about goals. We've talked about habits. Focus, and we've kind of touched on it throughout this episode, but I think focus is important. I can't remember where I first heard it, but I have like a little acronym, I believe is the word for focus. It's follow one course until success. A lot of times we take 20 steps in one direction, and that direction, in order to get to it, requires 23 steps, and we get to the 20th step and we just stop and we get the bright, shiny object syndrome and we head off in a different direction. And we never accomplish our goals. And maybe it's procrastination, maybe it's distraction, maybe it's so a lot of times I think people deal with fear of success. They have these ideas that they want to achieve, but they're afraid of what life might be like on the other side of that.
Yeah.
So for me, though, one thing that I would say has led towards me being able to accomplish a lot of the stuff in my life is just the fact that I don't stop. Even if unless it's a severe circumstance, we talked earlier about I get halfway through it and I realize this is just making me miserable. This is not really what I wanted. This isn't leading to where I wanted. But most of the time, I just don't start something else until I finish what I started. I don't buy another book until I've finished reading the last book. I don't start writing another book until I've finished the last book. I don't buy another course until I've gone through and implemented what I learned from the last course. Saying this is what I want to accomplish, setting up systems to help me accomplish it, and then not giving up when I'm 90% of the way. I know the irony of a high school dropout saying this, but in real life, in the things that are important to me, being able to follow something through to the end and then move on to the next thing. And that way I have a list, a track record of successes when people come to me and they say, hey, you're a copywriter. I see that you've written 3 books. I see that you've worked on 20 sales funnels in the last 2 years. I see this history of you accomplishing consistently, setting out to do something and then accomplishing it, and having one after another, focusing, waiting until I hit success from one thing before I pick up something else, has made it to where the next thing that I pick up is a lot easier. If I have a list of track record or a track record of things that I got 80% done with and then moved on to the next thing, then the next thing I'm going into it with all that baggage, all that I'm a failure. I only get to 80%. I never finish anything. And now I brought on this new lofty goal, and I know that I'm the type of person that never finishes anything. So what's going to happen with this goal or with this thing that I want to succeed in my life? Well, if history's any indicator, which is going to weigh a lot on my belief system about this new endeavor, then I'm only going to get 80%. So pushing myself to the 100% mark on things and publishing that new book or creating that new course before I jump to the next idea, for me, has a compound effect and makes each sequential goal after that, or each sequential destination that I want to reach, a lot more likely to happen. And so that was kind of what I wanted to finish off this episode with, is just the importance of seeing things through until completion.
Yeah, and I'm listening to you say that and agreeing, but also realizing it contradicts my advice of like this perpetual motion, like have these things, have all these balls in the air, right? So in closing, I guess I would say people heard different things today. And what it reveals for sure, because Nathan and I talk all the time, we're friends, we work together, and we have different approaches. So I really think that there is no magic formula for this. This is what I realized, right? And that was, I think, a schooled mindset when I, 7, 8 years ago, when I was like, boy, I'm not present in what I'm doing. I'm not productive like I want to be. Who can help me? Who is the guru of this? And there are people who will present themselves as such. We're here to tell you no such person exists, right? This is definitely an individual recipe that you have to construct for your own tastes, right? And your own dietary needs. And there's lots of good information about out there. There's lots of ways to kind of trial and error and test things. I do think self-knowledge is a very, very important foundation. Honest and non-judgmental self-evaluation and reevaluation and reevaluation and testing is super, super important. That was why I added that fourth one, because people could, fail and fail and fail and get really frustrated and not understand that the piece of self-knowledge that they're missing is something internal, something biological, something chemical. And we're realizing that these things play a bigger and bigger role in our thinking, in our emotions, and in our behavior. So if somebody struggled for a while, I would say, yes, listen to everything we've said, take what you need and leave the rest behind, but commit to that self-knowledge pursuit and self-evaluation and reevaluation work, which I think is so important to finding the right way to just proceed through life. It's going to be different for everybody. You see that it's different for Nathan and I. We've been in a mastermind together for 6 years at this point. If we were ever going to be on the same page about this stuff, it should have happened by now. So we hope this varied approach is helpful.
All right. And I think on most issues, we actually are on the same page. We just have slightly different approaches or slightly different nuanced points of view on things. And I would actually have to absolutely 100% agree with knowledge of self, having that ability to examine and non-judgmentally look at yourself is very important and probably the key to making either destination or either path that you choose to go down work. It's either way, my way, Brett's way, all the other different ways out there. Being able to critically self-examine yourself without beating yourself up is the key to making any of them work. Brett, thank you for having this conversation with me. For you, the listener out there, if you enjoyed this, make sure that you're subscribed either on YouTube or whatever video hosting platform we might put this on in the future, or your favorite podcast app. We would appreciate it. And if you have anything that we missed in this conversation, make sure you leave it in the comments or in the review section of the podcast. And until next time, we will catch you later.